The invasion begins. The sky over Earth burned as alien warships descended, their hulls black against the dying light of the setting sun. Humanity had long feared an extraterrestrial invasion, but when it finally came, the reality was worse than any nightmare. The Zharn Dominion, a ruthless empire that had conquered countless worlds, had set its sights on Earth. They arrived with arrogance, broadcasting messages of Earth's surrender in dozens of languages. Their leader, Lord Varzul, made it clear humanity could kneel or die. And when Earth refused, the war began. First contact, first loss. The Zharn's initial strike was devastating. Their towering war machines, sleek, hovering behemoths, glided over cities, unleashing energy weapons that turned buildings to molten slag. Infantry soldiers, clad in advanced exo-armor, moved with inhuman precision, cutting through human defenses as if they were nothing. In Washington, London, Beijing, and Moscow, desperate attempts to resist crumbled within hours. The Zharn laughed at the crude bullets and missiles hurled against them. Tanks, Earth's heaviest weapons, rolled into battle, only to be dismissed as outdated relics. Pathetic, Lord Varzul scoffed, watching a live battlefield feed. He stood aboard his command ship, arms crossed as human forces attempted to push back. They fight with machines of the past, rolling metal coffins. Crush them. On the ground, General Elias Carter clenched his fists as another regiment was obliterated. He had seen war before, but never like this. The Zharn's weapons cut through even the toughest armor. Their speed outmatched Earth's best vehicles, and their aerial dominance was absolute. Every tactic humanity had developed was being countered, predicted, and exploited. And yet, Carter refused to surrender. The tank's last stand. The 303rd Armored Division was one of the last functional tank battalions in North America. Old M1A2 Abrams tanks, along with Russian T-90s and German Leopard 2s, rolled through the burning ruins of Chicago, their crews tense. The city was lost, but Carter had a plan. One last attempt to stall the enemy long enough for a proper counterattack. The tanks took position along a narrow industrial corridor, a choke point surrounded by collapsed buildings. It was a death trap, but for whom, they would soon find out. The Zharn, predictably, did not consider Earth's tanks a threat. A fleet of their hovercraft advanced without hesitation, sleek alien war machines gliding forward, their gravitic drives humming ominously. Engage. The first volley of tank shells slammed into the lead hovercraft, and something unexpected happened. It wobbled. The Zharn's vehicles, designed for energy-based warfare, had no defense against the sheer kinetic impact of Earth's shells. Their armor, optimized against lasers and plasma, crumpled under the force of high-explosive rounds. A second volley fired, and the lead hovercraft collapsed. Its anti-gravity drive sputtered, then failed completely, sending the massive war machine crashing into the wreckage below. The Zharn pilots, momentarily stunned, hesitated. That was all Carter needed. Fire at will. The industrial corridor erupted with explosions. Dozens of tank rounds streaked through the air, hammering the invaders from every direction. One by one, the seemingly invincible hovercraft were brought low, their broken husks clogging the narrow streets. The Zharn tried to counterattack, but their infantry was too slow. Their energy weapons were deadly at range, but useless against fast-moving tanks weaving through rubble and debris. The humans fought like wolves, retreating after each strike, forcing the Zharn to advance into more traps. In mere minutes, an entire Zharn vanguard unit had been wiped out. Varzul's fury. On board his flagship, Lord Varzul seethed as he watched the live footage. His forces, his unstoppable war machines, were being destroyed by crude, outdated Earth vehicles. It was unthinkable. They got lucky, one of his officers said dismissively. Varzul turned on the soldier, his claws tightening into a fist. No, they adapted. The human strategy was clear now. Use terrain, force close-range combat, and exploit weaknesses the Zharn never considered. The fools actually think they can fight us on their own terms. With a growl, he gave his next order. Send in the mechs. Wipe them out. Carter's next move. In the battered remains of his command center, General Carter wiped the sweat from his brow. His tanks had won this battle, but he knew the Zharn were already adapting. The next wave would be even deadlier. Still, for the first time since the war began, there was hope. The Zharn had mocked Earth's tanks. Now, they feared them. And that was a mistake Carter intended to make them regret. The tanks strike back. The first victory had been unexpected, even to General Elias Carter. The Zharn Dominion, so confident in their technological superiority, had finally tasted defeat. But he knew better than to celebrate. The next battle would come soon, and this time, the aliens wouldn't underestimate them. Across the world, the news spread. Tanks had taken down the invaders. Soldiers, engineers, and mechanics rallied around the last armored divisions, ready to fight. Earth wasn't done yet. The ambush in the wastelands. The Zharn did exactly what Carter predicted. They retaliated fast and hard. Their massive walkers and hovercraft moved across Earth's ruined highways and into the vast deserts, hunting for human resistance cells. They believed their towering mechs, equipped with plasma cannons and energy shields, would crush any further opposition. They were wrong. Carter had anticipated their response. Using satellite reconnaissance and old battlefield tactics, he led a battalion of tanks into the Nevada desert, where the Zharn were advancing in tight formations. The aliens thought the open terrain would work in their favor. They thought their aerial superiority would make tanks useless. They had never fought an enemy like humanity. Hidden beneath the dunes, the tanks lay in wait, engines off, covered with heat-dispersing tarps. The Zharn column moved in, hovercraft leading, mechs towering above them, scanning for threats. Then, at Carter's signal, the desert exploded with fire. Tank shells erupted from the sand, slamming into the lead vehicles. The first few Zharn hovercraft went up in flames, their delicate anti-gravity drives shattered by kinetic force. Their mechs turned, trying to retaliate, but the tanks were already moving, kicking up dust clouds as they repositioned. The Zharn had never fought enemies who could strike and disappear so quickly. They had never imagined tanks, old, obsolete tanks, could move faster than their targeting systems could lock on. It was a slaughter. The mechs tried to fire back, but their energy weapons were designed for large-scale planetary invasions, not fast-moving ground battles. The tanks darted between dunes, launching explosive rounds at their weakest points, the joints, the power cores, the delicate sensor arrays. Within minutes, half the Zharn force lay in smoking ruins. The survivors attempted to retreat, their once mighty war machines, now the hunted. The humans pursued, a growing resistance. The victory in Nevada sent shockwaves through both sides. Across the world, resistance cells took note. Engineers and mechanics began reinforcing old tanks, welding on makeshift armor, and scavenging alien wreckage for new materials. A group of scientists in Poland discovered that Zharn energy shielding worked on certain electromagnetic frequencies. Within days, Earth's top minds were working to retrofit tanks with scavenged shielding tech. In Africa, resistance fighters armed old T-55s with stolen Zharn plasma rifles, mounting them onto rotating turrets. In Japan, a group of rogue engineers managed to rig a Type 10 tank with an experimental railgun, proving that human ingenuity could match alien firepower. The war had changed. The tanks weren't just surviving, they were adapting. Varzul's frustration. Aboard his flagship, Lord Varzul fumed. He had studied primitive civilizations before. They were supposed to fall. They were supposed to crumble beneath the weight of superior firepower. And yet, the humans weren't playing by the rules. They had no energy weapons, no shields, no spacefaring fleets. Yet their outdated machines were tearing through his forces. Why haven't they surrendered? Varzul growled. His second-in-command hesitated. They should be broken. He slammed a clawed fist onto the control panel, watching footage of yet another fallen Zharn column. What are they doing? Adapting, my lord. Varzul turned, his eyes narrowing. Adapting. That was a problem. If the humans were learning, then this war was no longer a conquest. It was a fight for survival. And the Zharn had never faced an enemy who refused to die. The battle for the Highlands. Knowing the next attack was coming, Carter planned another ambush, this time in the Scottish Highlands. The Zharn had sent an even larger force, expecting to wipe out the growing resistance. But the humans had learned as well. Using old rail lines, they transported dozens of tanks across the mountains, positioning them for the next assault. The moment the Zharn forces entered the valley, the tanks struck. Shells slammed into the towering mechs, and human forces, now equipped with salvaged Zharn weaponry, launched a devastating counterattack. The Zharn retreated again. For the first time, the mighty warlords of the Dominion knew fear. Carter's realization. As the smoke cleared, General Carter looked out over the battlefield. The Zharn weren't invincible. Their arrogance had blinded them. Their technology had made them complacent. But humanity? Humanity was built to endure. And now, the real war was just beginning. Rolling thunder. The world had changed. What started as a desperate fight for survival was now a war humanity intended to win. The Zharn Dominion, once confident in its superiority, was now scrambling to contain the unexpected resistance. Tanks, those so-called rolling metal coffins, had become symbols of defiance. Across every continent, armored divisions, scavenged war machines, and hybridized human-alien tech rumbled toward the front lines. Earth wasn't fighting to survive anymore. It was fighting to win. Urban warfare, human style. The next battle wasn't fought in the deserts or mountains. It was fought in the ruins of Berlin. The Zharn had established a command center in the city, believing it secure under their fleet's watchful eye. Hovercraft patrols, infantry in exo-armor, and towering mechs controlled the streets. What they didn't expect was a coordinated counteroffensive from inside the city itself. General Carter had learned one undeniable truth. The Zharn weren't used to ground warfare. They dominated planets with orbital strikes, overwhelming air power, and precision invasions. But they lacked experience in prolonged urban combat. That was humanity's specialty. The resistance had spent weeks planting explosives, fortifying key buildings, and setting up ambush points. When the attack began, it was chaos. Tank crews emerged from underground tunnels, rolling into the streets like ironclad ghosts. Snipers with scavenged plasma rifles picked off Zharn officers from rooftops. Engineers had modified old tanks with reactive armor, capable of withstanding the first few direct energy blasts. The Zharn mechs, towering over the streets, moved in to crush the human forces, only to walk directly into kill zones. The moment their feet touched the ground, tanks fired at their joints. Explosives hidden in buildings detonated, toppling the massive war machines like felled trees. The battle raged for hours. The Zharn, realizing their mistake, tried to retreat to their command center. But Carter had planned for that. A column of tanks waited near the Brandenburg Gate. The moment the first Zharn hovercraft attempted to flee, Earth's armored battalions rolled forward. What followed was a massacre. The streets shook as shell after shell tore through the alien machines. The tanks didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't retreat. They rolled through fire and rubble, their treads crushing alien corpses beneath them. By the time the battle ended, Berlin was back in human hands. The Zharn began to crack. From orbit, Lord Varzul watched in silence. He had lost another city, another stronghold, another battle. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They are relentless, his second-in-command admitted. Their armored machines should have been obsolete, yet they are crushing my forces beneath their treads, Varzul finished bitterly. For the first time in his long, merciless career, he felt something foreign. Doubt. He turned to his war council. Send reinforcements. More mechs. More hovercraft. More war beasts. I don't care what it takes. I want Earth's forces eradicated. His officers hesitated. One of them, a younger strategist, stepped forward. My lord, what if we have underestimated them? What if we... Varzul snapped his claws, and the officer's throat was crushed by an invisible force. We do not lose to primitives, he growled. Crush them. Now, the world unites. The Battle of Berlin wasn't just a victory, it was proof. Proof that Earth could win. Across the world, news spread of the Zharn defeat. More armies mobilized. Civilians joined the resistance. Engineers pushed tank designs to their limits. In America, a team of scientists successfully mounted a railgun onto an experimental Abrams chassis. In Russia, an underground factory repurposed old Soviet-era armored trains into mobile artillery platforms. In China, captured Zharn weapons were being integrated into mass-produced battle tanks. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. It was evolving. And now, for the first time, the Zharn were on the defensive. The road to victory. Carter stood atop a ruined skyscraper, looking down at the smoldering remains of Berlin's battlefield. His radio crackled with messages from commanders around the world. We took Cairo back. The Zharn fled like cowards. Paris is secured. Their warships retreated. Tokyo reports the first Zharn mech captured intact. We're studying it now. The tide had turned. The tanks had been mocked. Now, they ruled the battlefield. And soon, the war would be over. The last stand. The Zharn Dominion was crumbling. The invincible war machine that had conquered hundreds of worlds now found itself retreating, outmaneuvered by a species they had once mocked. Earth's resistance had grown into a unified global force, an unstoppable tide of steel, fire, and fury. The war had begun with the Zharn laughing at Earth's outdated tanks. It would end with those same tanks rolling over their last fortress. The final stronghold. Lord Varzul had retreated to the Zharn's primary command base on Earth, a massive fortress built atop the ruins of Brasilia. Towering walls of alien alloy surrounded the compound, reinforced by energy shields and a perimeter lined with their deadliest war machines. This was their last stand. If the fortress fell, so would their hold on Earth. General Elias Carter stood atop the hull of a modified M182 Abrams tank, scanning the battlefield through binoculars. His forces were ready. Hundreds of tanks from every surviving nation lined the hills beyond the fortress. Some were old models, battle-worn and scorched. Others were hybrid machines, armed with scavenged alien weaponry and experimental railguns. Carter smirked. The Zharn had brought the best of their technology to this battle. But humanity had brought its will. The final battle begins. At dawn, the assault began. A wall of tanks surged forward, engines roaring, treads grinding against the dirt. Artillery opened fire from the rear, sending massive shells screaming toward the Zharn defenses. Explosions rocked the fortress walls, sending shockwaves through the air. The Zharn fought back with everything they had. Towering mechs stomped into the battlefield, unleashing plasma barges. Hovercraft strafed the human lines, their cannons cutting fiery scars into the earth. Energy shields flickered, absorbing tank shells and railgun blasts. But the humans kept coming. Carter's forces had learned. They moved in coordinated waves, using speed and mobility to outmaneuver the Zharn war machines. Tanks weaved between wreckage and rubble, launching explosive volleys at the enemy's weak points. A squadron of modified Russian T-90s punched a hole through the western defenses, forcing Zharn infantry into the open, where hidden artillery wiped them out in seconds. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and unlike anything the Zharn had ever faced. And the humans were winning. The fall of Varzul. Lord Varzul watched from his command tower, his claws digging into the railing. His mighty war machine, his empire, was being shattered by creatures he had deemed unworthy of conquest. "My lord, the western defenses have fallen," an officer cried. "Their tanks are—" An explosion rocked the command center, cutting the officer's words short. The fortress was collapsing. Varzul's rage boiled over. "I will not be defeated by primitives," he roared. In a last act of defiance, he boarded his personal war mech, a massive, towering construct armed with plasma cannons and an energy blade capable of slicing through tanks like paper. If the Dominion was to fall, he would take as many humans with him as possible. As the fortress crumbled around him, Varzul stomped into the battlefield, his war mech unleashing destruction. He crushed human vehicles underfoot, blasted through ranks of infantry, and cleaved tanks in half. But he had made a fatal mistake. He was on the ground. He was within reach of the treads, crushed beneath the treads. Carter saw his opportunity. He called for a full assault, directing every tank in range to concentrate fire on Varzul's mech. Shells slammed into the towering war machine, denting its armor, cracking its shielding. The mech faltered, one of its legs failing. And then, the final blow came. A modified Abrams, piloted by a young tank commander named Rodriguez, charged straight at the Warlord. Varzul barely had time to react before the tank rammed into his damaged mech, forcing it backward, straight into the path of an oncoming column of tanks. One after another, they rolled over his broken form. The last warlord of the Zharn Dominion was crushed beneath the very machines he had once mocked. The war ends. The moment Varzul fell, the remaining Zharn forces lost all coordination. Some tried to fight, but most attempted to flee. None escaped. By nightfall, the fortress had fallen. The war was over. Epilogue. A new era. Humanity had done the impossible. The world lay in ruins, but it was their world. Earth had not just survived, it had won. As the last of the Zharn warships fled the solar system, General Carter stood atop a battered tank, watching the sunrise. The war had cost them dearly, but in the end, humanity had proven itself. The Zharn had called tanks relics, but today they were the reason Earth was free. And if any other empire thought to challenge humanity, they would be waiting.